Imagine boarding a plane, first-class ticket in hand, your hard work, your achievements, your rightful place. Now imagine being told you don't belong. No explanation, no valid reason, just suspicion, judgment, and exclusion. This is the story of Dr. Alina Monroe, a successful black CEO whose journey on a flight to Tokyo became a powerful moment exposing deep-rooted biases. In the plush confines of an airplane cabin, where status and privilege are often assumed, Alina faced a shocking reality. Her identity overshadowed her credentials. Why was she singled out when others sat comfortably, without question? What happens when dignity is denied at 36,000 feet? And how far will one woman go to fight for respect, not just for herself, but for every person who has ever been made to feel invisible? This is a story of resilience, courage, and change, sparked from a moment that should have been routine. Are you ready to witness how one act of discrimination led to a reckoning that transformed an entire industry? Join us as we unfold this emotional journey of injustice, power, and ultimately, belonging. If you believe everyone deserves respect, regardless of skin color, hit like, share this story, and subscribe now to stay with us through every step of this powerful journey. The air inside the first-class cabin was quiet, hushed like a cathedral just before a sermon. Leather seats gleamed under soft overhead lighting. A subtle note of citrus and lavender drifted through the air. The trademark scent of Eurovia International's premium cabin service, Seat 2A, was perfectly fluffed. Tray down. A glass of sparkling water already sweating against the coaster. And standing next to it, with a tense smile pressed across her lips, was flight attendant Melissa Crane. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one last time. Please gather your things and move out of this seat." She didn't shout, but her voice was sharp enough to make the man in 1C look up from his tablet. A couple in 2D and 2E paused their quiet laughter. The quiet snapped. Seated in 2A, calm and steady, was Dr. Alina Monroe. She looked up at Melissa, her spine tall, her gaze unshaken, her black cashmere coat folded neatly beside her. A slim leather laptop case rested in her lap. Alina spoke softly, but every word landed with weight. "I have a valid ticket for 2A, purchased in full. I am a Platinum Apex member. I am not moving until you explain why that seems to no longer matter." Melissa's jaw twitched. A silence stretched long and awkward. Passengers around them fidgeted. Someone in 3C lifted their phone discreetly, pretending to scroll, but recording. Melissa's smile sharpened. She turned toward the front of the cabin, flicked on the intercom, and muttered, "I need a supervisor and security. Now." Alina's breath remained even. She glanced out the window. The sky beyond was lavender blue, the way it looked when the world hadn't decided what kind of day it wanted to be. Tension was thick, but she didn't move. Inside, she felt it, the tightening in her chest, the faint tingle behind her eyes. Not from fear, from familiarity. This wasn't the first time someone had decided she didn't belong in a space she had paid, worked, bled to earn. But this time felt different. She had been flying Eurovia for years. She knew the routines. She knew the silent glances. But never had she been asked to leave. Not like this. "You don't have to do this," Alina said, her voice even but low. "You're making a mistake." Melissa didn't answer. Behind her, murmurs grew louder. A man in a navy blazer leaned to whisper something to his wife. A woman 2 rows behind snapped a photo. The gate to boarding still remained open, and yet here was a respected black woman elegantly dressed, entirely composed, being publicly confronted as if she'd snuck into first class like a stowaway. The absurdity wasn't just offensive, it was surreal. Alina folded her hands over her lap and tried to steady her breathing. This seat had cost over $5,000. She didn't blink at the price. It was a cost of doing business. She was headed to Tokyo to finalize the expansion of her tech supply chain company, the kind of deal that shifted global charts and stockholder projections. She had rehearsed the presentation in her head more than once that morning. Her Japanese counterpart, Hiroshi Tanaka, was already waiting, but all of that was drifting further away with each second that ticked by. Another flight attendant leaned into Melissa's shoulder and whispered something. Melissa only nodded, then stepped forward again. "You're holding up departure, ma'am," she said. "We have no record that this seat was properly assigned to you. You'll need to exit while we verify." "My boarding pass is right here," Alina said. She reached into her coat pocket slowly and pulled it out. Melissa glanced at it for all of 2 seconds. It may have been scanned incorrectly. "We're calling security." Alina exhaled. Her hands were cold. She remembered to sit tall. She remembered her mother's voice. Long ago, when she was just a skinny, awkward girl walking into a classroom full of stairs. "Don't let them see you break." "Fine," Alina said, voice calm. "Then we'll wait for security. But I'm not moving." Passengers shifted again. A toddler whined. An elderly woman behind her asked, "What's going on?" but no one answered. Melissa walked off toward the galley. Alina sat still. The low hum of the engines vibrated through the floor beneath her feet. Her heels tapped softly against the carpet, the only sound she allowed herself. A young flight attendant with tired eyes peeked from behind the curtain, but said nothing. She was watching, too. This wasn't about a seat. This was about being seen and being erased. Alina stared ahead. She could feel the cameras rolling. She could feel the commentary forming in people's minds. A black woman, alone in first class. Someone who must have done something wrong. Except she hadn't. She had done everything right. Her suitcase was regulation size. Her ID valid. Her credentials sterling. She had even smiled when she boarded, though she hadn't felt like it. Still, here she was, a first-class passenger, being treated like a fraud, like an intruder, like a problem. The absurdity hit her again. If I had lighter skin, would we be having this conversation? She knew the answer, and even now, part of her, the part shaped by decades of navigating rooms not made for her, whispered, "Maybe it's not worth it. Maybe just step aside. Get on the next flight. Keep your head down." But she crushed that voice. She had earned this seat. She had paid for this seat. And she would not give it up because someone else was uncomfortable with the way she looked in it. From the corner of her eye, Alina saw 2 uniformed security officers stepping onto the plane. One of them was already frowning. She folded her ticket back into her lap and sat still. Let them come. She was ready. This time, she would not bend. This time, she would make sure they remembered, not just her name, but the consequences. 12 hours earlier, Chicago's skies were a quiet shade of gray. The city was waking up slowly, steam rising from sidewalk grates, coffee cups clutched in gloved hands. Snow still dusted the corners of the curbs, but spring was whispering its return. Inside a glass tower overlooking the river, "Doctor." Alina Monroe stood by the window in her corner office, holding a travel mug with both hands. She didn't drink the coffee. She just needed the warmth. The view stretched wide, but her mind was somewhere farther east. Tokyo. In just under 20 hours. She was set to sit across from a room full of partners whose decision could reshape the future of her company. a deal valued at $220 million, a 10-year expansion into Asia that would make her logistics tech firm one of the Global Five. She had worked toward this for nearly a decade, and now, all that stood between her and that meeting was a 14-hour flight. She turned from the window and glanced at her desk. Neatly stacked files, 2 printed copies of the presentation. Her black leather laptop bag rested beside her overcoat. Alina breathed in, slow and intentional. She had learned to do that before every departure. Not because she was nervous, but because the world had taught her to expect turbulence long before the plane ever left the ground. She had earned every inch of her success, graduated first in her class, built her company from her parents' living room, navigated venture capital as a black woman in a room full of men who had once asked her if she was someone's assistant. She had been the only one like her for most of her life. And today, as always, she would board first class, quiet, professional, prepared. Cars downstairs. Jordan, her assistant, said, appearing at the door. "Thank you," Alina replied. She zipped her coat and grabbed her laptop bag. "You need anything else before I head to the airport?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Just remind me to sleep on the plane this time." "Deal." Jordan smiled back, holding the door as she walked past. He was 20 years younger, sharp, loyal, and increasingly protective of her. She had picked him out of an internship program 4 years ago, and since then, he had become one of the few people who could read her silence. The black sedan slid quietly through downtown traffic toward O'Hare. Alina stared out the window, watching the buildings fade into highway signs. She checked her phone. Her mother had texted a Bible verse that morning, as she always did before a big meeting. Isaiah 42:31. "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength." Alina closed her eyes briefly. She could still hear her mother's voice reading that aloud when she was a child, curled up in bed after school, wondering if there was a world outside their neighborhood worth fighting for. There had been, but it came with a cost. She arrived at the airport 2 hours early, as always. No entourage, no noise, just a soft click of her heels on the tile as she passed through security. The attendant at the Eurovia International check-in counter smiled and greeted her professionally. Her ID and Platinum Apex card were scanned without issue. Her seat was confirmed 2A, first class, direct to Tokyo. Alina thanked the agent and walked toward security. As she moved through TSA pre-check, a white man in front of her dropped his boarding pass. She reached down and handed it back to him. He smiled, then glanced at her own ticket. "Flying first class, too. Huh, good for you." The way he said it, not mean, not aggressive, just surprised. She smiled politely and said nothing. She had learned to smile through 1,000 little moments like that. The comments dressed as compliments, the looks that lasted a second too long, the questions phrased like curiosity but rooted in suspicion. She made her way toward Concourse B, Gate B18. Eurovia's first-class boarding area gleamed with polished metal and cream leather. A lounge attendant offered her sparkling water. Alina declined politely and sat by the window. Outside, the plane waited, massive, sleek, white with navy trim. She stared at the wings, watching the reflection of the terminal lights ripple across the fuselage. She pulled out her laptop, ran through the presentation one last time, then minimized the screen and stared at her background image, a photo of her and her younger sister, taken 2 years before her sister passed away. It made her chest ache quietly, in that familiar way. Boarding will begin shortly for Arovia Flight 2T7 to Tokyo. The gate agent called. Alina stood and gathered her things. As she approached the gate, a flight attendant in a crisp gray uniform took her boarding pass and smiled. "Thank you. Dr. Monroe, you're all set. Have a pleasant flight." Alina nodded, stepped into the jet bridge, and felt her pulse settle into a rhythm she knew by heart. She had done this dozens of times. The metal door opened. Cool air, infused with lemon and cedar, hit her face. A warm, rehearsed voice greeted her from the galley. "Welcome aboard." Alina smiled and nodded, turning left into the first-class cabin, and that's when she noticed it. A flight attendant, tall, blonde, around her mid-30s, watching her with a strange look. Not hostile, but not welcoming either. Her name tag read Melissa Crane. Their eyes met for a moment, then Melissa turned away. Alina stepped to seat 2A, placed her bag in the overhead bin, and eased into the seat. It was soft, cool against her back. She exhaled gently, letting her shoulders fall. Finally, she looked around. Most of the other first-class seats were still empty. An older white couple was chatting near 1A. A younger white man in an expensive sports jacket scrolled through his phone in 3C. No one looked twice at them. She pulled out her notebook and started reviewing her notes again, underlining key terms, adjusting phrasing for cross-cultural clarity. But she could feel it. Melissa was still watching her. Alina didn't look up. She had felt that gaze before, in boardrooms, at black-tie galas, at country clubs she was invited to, but never fully welcomed in. That gaze was not curiosity. It was calculation. Alina closed her notebook and sat back. It was probably nothing. Probably. Still, her pulse ticked upward, just slightly. She reminded herself again. To stay calm. Stay composed. Stay above it all. She always had. But something in her stomach twisted. A knot forming she couldn't quite name yet. A woman in seat 3A boarded, and Melissa greeted her with a bright, casual smile. "Welcome, Mrs. Delaney. So good to see you again." Alina blinked. There was no warmth in Melissa's voice when she greeted her earlier. No familiarity, not even politeness. And that, more than anything, made her uneasy. She sipped her water and waited. Outside, the last bags were being loaded. Inside, she didn't know it yet, but a storm was already forming, and it would start with a question, one that should have been harmless, but wouldn't be. Melissa Crane had always trusted her instincts. That was what 15 years of working the skies had taught her. She prided herself on being able to spot potential issues before they became problems. People who needed special attention. People who didn't belong where they were. When she saw Dr. Alina Monroe seated in 2A, something in her paused. Melissa didn't know exactly what it was. The woman looked put together. Sure, designer coat, polished heels, laptop open in her lap. Her expression was unreadable, focused, like someone who had been on flights like this before. But Melissa felt that tickle of doubt. Something just didn't line up. She walked back toward the galley with a tray in hand, but kept glancing back at Alina. It wasn't the first time she'd seen passengers try to sneak into first class. Melissa had dealt with it plenty. People sliding in during boarding, especially once they noticed the cabin was only half full. Some were smooth about it. Some were bold. Either way, her job was to keep things in order. When she glanced at the passenger list again, the name under 2A read Monroe. Alina. The name was there, but that didn't settle the feeling gnawing at her. She leaned over to a younger flight attendant at the service station and whispered, "Did you see the woman in 2A?" The younger attendant blinked. Yes. Why Melissa hesitated. Something feels off. Can you confirm her boarding was scanned properly? Her name's on the manifest. The girl replied. Melissa didn't answer. She turned back toward the cabin. Alina sat quietly, crossing one leg over the other, unaware or perhaps entirely aware of the silent surveillance aimed her way. She had felt the flight attendant's gaze, not once or twice, but several times. That soft, hovering watchfulness, the kind that was polite on the surface but unmistakably pointed. She took a slow breath and glanced up briefly. Their eyes met for a second before Melissa turned away. Alina tried to refocus on her notes. She had built a life where she didn't have to justify her place anymore. At least, that's what she told herself. But moments like this had a way of reaching under her skin and pulling loose threads from memories she thought were stitched closed. She remembered an interview from 15 years ago. A male executive had glanced at her resume, then at her, and said, "This is impressive, but are you sure you're ready for this kind of pressure?" He had smiled when he said it, as if he were doing her a favor. She remembered being followed in a department store at 23. She remembered sitting in business class on a flight to Amsterdam 5 years ago and being asked if she was in the wrong seat. And now, here she was again. Same undertone. Different setting. Melissa returned to the cabin. She walked down the aisle slowly, pretending to check the overhead bins. As she reached Alina's row, she paused, leaned slightly, and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, may I see your boarding pass?" Alina looked up, calm but alert. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she closed her laptop. "Is there a problem?" she asked. "I just need to confirm your seat assignment," Melissa said, her voice even, but clipped. Alina didn't flinch. She reached into the side pocket of her bag and pulled out her printed boarding pass. "It's 2A. I was checked in at the gate without issue." Melissa took the pass and examined it longer than necessary. Row, seat, flight number, barcode. Everything was correct. Yet, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You'll need to wait a moment," she said. "I want to verify something." "Is there a reason?" Alina asked. Not unkindly, but directly. Melissa hesitated, then gave the most neutral answer she could find. "We've had an issue recently with duplicate seat scans. I just want to be sure we don't have an error." Alina nodded once, slowly. "Very well." Melissa turned and walked back to the galley, still holding the boarding pass. Alina stared forward. In her chest, the knot from earlier twisted tighter. This wasn't about a computer error. She could feel it. She knew the shape of this tension, knew the difference between a system glitch and a human assumption. And this was an assumption. Across the aisle in C2B, a middle-aged man in a gray suit was pretending to read, but his eyes kept darting toward her. Behind her, murmurs began to swell. She probably booked the wrong cabin. "I think I saw something like this on a flight to Boston once." Someone laughed softly, the kind of laughter that cut sideways. Alina kept her posture straight. She glanced toward the aisle. Melissa was now speaking with another uniformed woman, a supervisor, perhaps, mid-40s, blonde bob, stern expression. They both glanced toward her at the same time, and that was when Alina understood. This wasn't just a momentary suspicion. It was turning into something deliberate. Melissa returned with the woman at her side. The supervisor offered no greeting, no explanation. "I'm Diane Brewster, station manager for Aerovia," she said. "We need to re-verify your ticket and identification. There seems to be an irregularity." Alina blinked once. "There's no irregularity. My name is Dr. Alina Monroe. I checked in with your agent. I presented my ID and loyalty card. You have all of it on file. Just protocol," Diane said quickly. "These situations happen, do they?" Alina asked, holding her gaze. "How often do they happen to passengers already seated in first class, who happen to be black women?" Diane's lips parted slightly, but said nothing. Melissa handed her the boarding pass. "Security has been contacted to assist in sorting this," Diane said. Alina took her ID from her wallet and handed it over without a word. Diane looked at it, looked at Alina, then looked again at the boarding pass. Still, something in her face didn't change. The assumption was still there, that look that said, "You don't belong here." The cabin had gone nearly silent. Even the man in 3C had taken off his headphones. Alina felt every eye on her. Her voice stayed soft, but she made sure it carried. "I'd like to know," she said, "if a white man with this same ticket and ID would be questioned right now. I'd like to know if you would summon security for him." Diane opened her mouth, but before she could answer, the aircraft door creaked open again. Footsteps approached. Security had arrived. Alina exhaled and placed her hands in her lap. Whatever was coming next, she wouldn't meet it with fear. Not this time. The security officer who boarded Flight 227 had a nameplate that read L. Grant, but his posture spoke louder than anything on his uniform. He moved with a kind of quiet authority that said he had done this many times before and rarely questioned the reason. As he stepped into the first-class cabin, he scanned the seats and spotted Diane Brewster standing stiffly near seat 2A. Melissa Crane stood a half-step behind, arms folded across her waist, face tight with manufactured neutrality. Alina Monroe looked up at the officer. She didn't stand. She didn't shrink. "Ma'am," Officer Grant began, "we've received a report about a potential seat irregularity. I'm going to need to ask you to come with me so we can resolve this off the aircraft." Alina didn't move. Her voice was calm but layered with steel. "I have a valid ticket. Officer, I am seated exactly where I was assigned. My identification has already been shown. If there's confusion, it can be cleared up right here without removing me like a criminal." Officer Grant shifted, clearly not expecting resistance. Not the calm, articulate kind. His hand moved toward the radio clipped to his vest, as though the situation might already require backup. "Ma'am," he repeated, "this will only take a few moments. You're disrupting the boarding process." Alina could feel the stares on her like spotlights. First class had gone completely silent. Even coach passengers just behind the curtain were now craning their necks, trying to make sense of what was unfolding. Disrupting the boarding process, she thought. Not the employees who had stopped her, not the ones turning a simple seat assignment into a circus, but her. She considered her next move carefully. There was always a fine line, especially for women like her, especially for black women. Be too quiet. You're invisible. Be too firm, and you're dangerous. Any wrong move, any wrong tone, and the narrative changes in an instant. Still seated, Alina looked the officer directly in the eye. "Before I leave my seat, I need to understand what precisely I'm being accused of. What part of my boarding pass or identification has caused concern?" Diane Brewster spoke up instead. "Dr. Monroe, it's not about accusation. It's about verification. With heightened fraud and frequent seat upgrades, we simply have to double-check when something feels off." "When something feels off," Alina repeated, her brows rising. "Please clarify what part of me feels off to you." Her voice wasn't raised, but it landed with weight. Passengers leaned closer. Melissa glanced at Diane. silently pleading for her to get control of the situation. Diane responded the way many people in power respond when their authority is being questioned. She dug in. "This isn't personal. We are following standard procedures." "Your procedures," Alina said quietly, "seem very selective." Behind her, a woman whispered to her husband, "She's handling this better than I would." Another passenger pulled out their phone and began recording. Officer Grant finally took a step forward. "Ma'am, I'm asking you to cooperate. We can clear this up at the gate and reboard you afterward if appropriate." Alina could feel her pulse now, slow but heavy. She could also feel something else building, something quieter, deeper, not rage, not even humiliation, resolve. She reached down and picked up her briefcase. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction of dragging her off, but she wasn't going to thank them for it either. As she stood, she turned back to Diane and Melissa. "My name is Dr. Alina Monroe. I am the founder and CEO of Alturas Global Logistics. I have flown first class with your airline more times than I can count. I have Platinum Apex status and a valid seat assignment in 2A. You have chosen to humiliate me publicly without any legitimate cause. And now, you are removing me from this plane based on your feelings, not facts." Melissa's lips pressed into a tight line. Diane simply said, "We'll sort this at the gate." Alina stepped into the aisle, walking behind Officer Grant. As she passed the rows of seated passengers, many of them avoided eye contact. A few looked apologetic. One older black man in 3B gave her a subtle nod, the kind of gesture that said, "I see you. I've been you." She walked with her head high, her heels clicking softly against the carpet. The long, quiet walk from 2A to the exit door felt like a descent into something deeper than inconvenience. It felt like a statement being made at her expense. As she stepped off the plane, she heard the click of the aircraft door shutting behind her. The flight had been scheduled to depart in less than 10 minutes. Now it would leave without her. She followed Officer Grant down the jet bridge and into the waiting area, where an airline representative was already typing into a terminal. Her name, her status, her reservation. "Your seat appears valid," the representative muttered after a moment. "Of course it does," Alina replied, "but the damage had already been done." The representative offered a flustered apology. Something about confusion. Something about system errors. Alina didn't respond. She looked through the terminal windows at the aircraft still sitting at the gate. Her phone buzzed. It was Jordan. "Everything okay?" he asked, and he swallowed. Her voice was low, measured. "No. They just removed me from the flight. What I'll explain later." She hung up. Inside the cabin of Flight 227, the mood had shifted. The man in 3C finally put his phone down. The couple in 1A began whispering. One of the flight attendants asked if anyone wanted a beverage while they waited. Melissa stood near the front of the cabin, pretending to tidy her tray setup. But her mind wasn't on the drinks or the overhead bins. She thought about the way Alina had looked at her. Not with anger, not even contempt, with disappointment. That was worse. She didn't know who Alina Monroe really was. Not yet. But something told her this wasn't the last time she'd hear that name. Back in the terminal, Alina stared at the departure screen. Flight 227 blinked with the word "on time" in cheerful green. A flight she had paid for, a seat she had earned. And yet here she was, standing, waiting, watching it all pull away without her. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because someone looked at her and decided she didn't fit. And now, the wheels were in motion. because Alina Monroe wasn't just a wrong passenger. She was a storm, and Melissa Crane had just pulled the first thread. Back in the cabin of Flight 227, Melissa Crane exhaled slowly, her fingers brushing down the front of her uniform to smooth wrinkles that weren't there. She could still feel the heat of eyes pressing against her. Even though the first-class cabin had returned to a forced stillness, passengers weren't speaking, but they were watching. She could sense the shift in energy. The air had thickened with judgment, curiosity, maybe even disbelief. One woman in 2D had crossed her arms and sat upright like a schoolteacher watching a student bluff through a book report. Still, Melissa held her posture. She told herself she had done her job. The woman hadn't been aggressive, but she had been unsettling. Something about the way she held herself, so calm, so measured, like she had expected this, as if she had seen this before. Melissa didn't like that. She preferred passengers who flinched, who apologized, who made her feel like she was in control, not the ones who stared back with still eyes, daring her to explain her own discomfort. She walked briskly to the front and ducked behind the curtain, needing a breath. Diane Brewster was at the front of the plane now, arms folded, lips pressed tight. She refused to comply without being told exactly what was wrong. Melissa said, "She said she was a doctor or something. Dr. Alina Monroe." Melissa confirmed. She had the right seat, but something felt off. Her name didn't sound familiar on the frequent flyer list. Diane's eyes narrowed. "We'll sort it at the gate, but security's already walking her out." Melissa nodded, but something inside her twitched. She'd expected relief. Instead, all she felt was a buzzing in her chest, something that didn't feel like victory. Out on the tarmac, Alina Monroe stood with her phone in hand. Jordan's voice buzzed in her ear as she paced slowly near the windows. "They did what I was removed from the flight," she said evenly, "in front of everyone. For what reason? They didn't give one. Claimed irregularities. I showed everything. They still called security." A long pause. "You want me to start making calls?" he asked. "Not yet." Alina looked out the window again. The plane still sat idle, its nose angled slightly upward as if poised to lift away from the mess they had just created. But it wasn't over. Not yet. "I need the name of the Arovia CEO," she said. Jordan responded almost immediately. "Nathan Cross, based in Atlanta. Find out if he's reachable tonight." "You're going to take this all the way." Alina smiled without warmth. "I'm going to take it as far as it needs to go." She ended the call. Across the terminal, the intercom chirped, and Flight 227's final boarding call echoed through the air. Alina watched without blinking as the jet bridge retracted. The plane pulled away from the gate at 8:38 p.m., 8 minutes late. She noted the time. Every second counted now. Back in the sky, as the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Melissa moved robotically through the cabin, offering warm towels and menus. Her smile was hollow. Even the most talkative passengers had grown restrained. The man in 3C finally broke the silence. "Oh, was that woman removed because she didn't belong here?" Melissa blinked. She was removed because she refused to comply with crew instruction. "She didn't seem disruptive," he said. "She seemed composed." Melissa straightened. "I followed procedure." But she could feel the lie threading through her throat. It wasn't that she had done something explicitly wrong. It was that she had acted on a feeling, an assumption, a suspicion that had no grounding except the one she couldn't say out loud. And now she was starting to realize that might not be enough. At the same time, back in the Sky Lounge, Alina sat in a velvet-backed chair with a glass of water she hadn't touched. The TV behind the bar was muted, but the ticker at the bottom of the screen showed international markets. Her company's name, Alturas Global, flickered briefly across the screen before disappearing again. She was supposed to be landing in Tokyo by midnight local time. Instead, she was here, grounded, not by weather or technical failure, but by bias. She opened her laptop and began typing. To Jordan Ellis Subject Incident Summary. Begin compiling a timeline. I want a full record of what happened. Names, timestamps, every employee involved. Pull security footage if we can. Contact Aerovia's corporate legal department. Prepare non-disclosure flags, but do not initiate anything yet. Wait for my word. She paused and added one more line. And Jordan, get the media contact list ready. Just in case. She hit send. For a moment, she sat still. She wasn't someone who believed every slight deserved a war. But this wasn't a slight. This wasn't someone bumping into her in a hallway or mistaking her title on a Zoom call. This was erasure. Public. Deliberate. Humiliating. The kind that left unchecked. Carved scars not only in her, but in every young black woman watching. She remembered being 12, sitting in coach with her mother, looking past the curtain into first class, and wondering what it would feel like to belong there. She had never forgotten that little girl. And today, they had told her she still didn't belong, even with all the evidence in her hands, even with the ticket she had earned. She couldn't let that go. Not just for herself, but for every other woman who would sit in that seat someday. And so she opened a blank document. She titled it, Aerovia Accountability Proposal. The cursor blinked at the top of the page. Then she began to write. The Sky Lounge had gone quiet. Around Dr. Alina Monroe. Travelers murmured over laptops and espresso cups, unaware that the woman seated in the corner booth with the untouched glass of water had just been removed from a flight for no reason other than someone's perception of who did or didn't belong in first class. Her laptop screen glowed softly. The cursor blinked like a pulse. She stared at the first line of her proposal, rereading the words she had typed 15 minutes ago. Aerovia Accountability Proposal. She was known for being measured, intentional, calculated, even in boardrooms. Competitors underestimated her because she rarely raised her voice, because she always made space before she struck. But tonight, there was no space left. Jordan Ellis arrived at the lounge entrance out of breath, his wool coat flapping open, a folder in one hand and a phone in the other. He spotted her instantly and moved to her table. They're already fielding media inquiries, he said, not sitting down. Alina raised an eyebrow. Jordan continued. A passenger posted a clip. It's making the rounds on X. Hashtags are starting to trend. Aerovia bias. Me seat while black. Alina didn't react. Instead, she looked down at her watch. The time was 9:02 p.m. Flight 227 was in the air now. Gone. So was the Tokyo deal. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. Japan time. There was no way to reach it without a direct flight, and no direct flight was leaving until the next day. Any word from the airline's executive office, she asked. I left messages with Nathan Cross's executive assistant and Aerovia's VP of operations, Jordan said. They haven't responded. Legal is on standby. Your statement is ready to go. Alina closed the laptop. Not yet. Jordan hesitated. You sure? She nodded once. They'll respond soon enough. The question is, what tone do we want to use when they do? Jordan finally sat down, loosening his scarf. You know, he said, voiced low. You could have walked away from this. Alina looked out the large lounge window. I almost did. And it was true. As she had stepped off that plane, every part of her professional training told her to avoid the fight. Don't escalate. Preserve the brand. Let it go. She could have said nothing. Booked the next flight. Arrived late. Apologized to the Tokyo team and blamed weather or airport delays. That was the safer route. But the image of her walking off that plane, silent and defeated, kept burning in her mind. It wasn't just about the seat. It was about the message that even at the top of her industry, with everything documented, everything paid for, everything earned, someone could still look at her and decide she didn't belong. And worse, act on it. She had done everything right, and still, they had chosen to believe the story in their heads over the facts in her hands. Jordan leaned forward. You want to wait for Cross to call you no, Alina replied. He won't. Not yet. First, he'll gather his crisis team. Then he'll watch the video. Then someone in legal will call someone in PR. And by morning, they'll have a draft apology prepared for review. And when that happens, she turned back to Jordan, eyes steady. Then I'll talk, but not about an apology, about demands. Jordan nodded slowly. He had seen her like this only once before years ago, when a major supplier tried to back out of a contract by claiming clerical error. Back then, she had built a 28-slide deck and dismantled their legal position in under 10 minutes. That wasn't rage. It was precision. Jordan handed her the folder he had been holding. Inside were printed versions of every document she had used to board. Her booking confirmation, loyalty status printout, ID scans, time-stamped gate logs, even a screenshot of the check-in terminal showing 2A assigned to her name. Alina flipped through the pages slowly. Her hands were steady. I want every employee's name involved in this. Start with Melissa Crane. Get her employee ID, tenure, performance history. Pull public records if needed. Jordan was already typing. She continued, Next, Diane Brewster. I want complaints from any prior incidents, internal reviews, any signs of bias. Look for patterns, repeat behavior. And Officer Grant Jordan asked. She paused. We'll deal with him after we deal with Erovia. Jordan nodded. Alina leaned back in the booth. Her eyes were heavier now. She hadn't eaten. Her body was starting to feel the fatigue. Still, she refused to fold. They're expecting me to go away, she said. They think this will be tomorrow's forgettable headline. It won't be, Jordan replied. I won't let it. Outside the window, another Aerovia flight lifted from the runway into the dark sky. It wasn't her flight. It wasn't her route. But it carried the same logo, the same culture, the same assumptions dressed in professionalism. Alina watched the lights disappear into the clouds. In her mind, she replayed the moment Melissa had stood above her. The request didn't sound like a request. It was an order disguised as protocol. It had nothing to do with tickets or safety or policy. It had everything to do with perception. Alina had dared to sit where someone didn't think she should. And for that, she had been made to leave. But this time, she wasn't leaving quietly. She opened her laptop again. I want to draft 6 demands, she told Jordan. Not recommendations. Conditions. He looked up from his screen. Conditions for what? For Erovia to retain our contract. His eyebrows lifted. We spend over $50 million a year with them. Exactly, she said. And I want them to feel what it means to lose us. She began to speak slowly, and Jordan typed, First, full public acknowledgement of what happened. Not a vague apology. a real one. Second, she continued, immediate termination or suspension of the employees involved. Third, mandatory anti-bias training conducted by external experts. No internal HR fluff. I want measurable outcomes. Fourth, her voice grew sharper. Diversity accountability metrics across hiring and promotion. Fifth, donation to civil rights organizations. A serious amount. And sixth. She paused. Jordan waited. A personal meeting with Nathan Cross, she said, face to face. I want him to look me in the eye when he explains how his people decided I didn't belong. Jordan looked up. Do you want all this in writing now? No, she said. They're not ready yet, but they will be. She closed the laptop again. Her eyes were tired, but her posture hadn't slipped, not even once. In the silence, Jordan watched her. There was a storm in her quiet, and somewhere in a corporate office far from this terminal, someone was going to feel it by morning. At exactly 5:17 or Eastern Time, Nathan Cross sat bolt upright in bed. His phone screen glowed beside him, vibrating with a string of urgent notifications. He wasn't a man easily startled. As CEO of Eurovia International, he was used to pressure, turbulence, and the constant background hum of crisis management. But something in the tone of his assistant's texts made his chest tighten before he even opened the news links. Passenger incident, viral footage, major client, trending hashtags. Nathan swung his legs out of bed, grabbed his glasses from the nightstand, and opened the first video. It took 7 seconds for the chill to sink in. There she was, a calm, well-dressed black woman seated in Eurovia's first-class cabin, surrounded by suspicion. The flight attendant hovered above her, arms folded, tone sharp but not loud. There was no chaos, no yelling, just something more dangerous. A kind of quiet humiliation playing out in front of strangers. And then, there was the moment she was escorted off the plane. Nathan paused the video. He had seen that look before. A look of someone who had been here before, who knew exactly what was happening, and had already decided she would not be broken by it. He glanced back at his screen. The caption read, "Black CEO removed from first class despite valid ticket. You tell me if this isn't racial bias." Underneath it, the hashtags had already caught fire. Seat while black. Eurovia discrimination. Justice for Dr. Monroe. Nathan's stomach sank. He knew that name. Dr. Alina Monroe, CEO of Alturas Global Logistics, one of their largest clients, holder of a $50 million annual corporate travel and freight contract. He had met her once, briefly, at an industry conference in Barcelona. He remembered her because she had said almost nothing during a roundtable full of executives who wouldn't stop talking. And yet, when she did speak, the entire room went quiet. Now, she was the woman at the center of a storm he didn't know how to contain. He immediately dialed his assistant. "I need the full incident report from O'Hare. Everything. Names, footage, all communications from the gate and cabin crew." His assistant responded without hesitation. "Already compiling." "Sir, legal's assembling a team now. PR is asking if you want to release a statement." "Not yet," Nathan said. "First, I want to see what happened." 20 minutes later, he sat in his home office, hunched over his laptop as security footage and internal messages rolled across the screen. The initial boarding showed Dr. Monroe arriving early. Calm, professional, no irregularities. Her ID scanned, seat confirmed. A gate agent smiled and thanked her. Then came the body cam footage from the terminal officer. Officer Liam Grant approached her like she was a threat, not a customer. He didn't even ask for ID before demanding she step off the aircraft. Then, the damning footage from inside the cabin. She was seated, silent, asking for an explanation, and the employees couldn't give one. Instead, they leaned on procedure, feelings, instincts, the kind that didn't seem to apply to white passengers in the same cabin. Nathan scrubbed back through the video and paused on her face. The expression was unreadable. Not anger, not shame. It was the expression of a person filing every second of the experience away, preparing to respond not with emotion, but strategy. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Aerovia's Vice President of Partnerships. "Have you spoken to her yet?" the VP asked. "Not yet," Nathan said. "Has she issued a public statement?" "Not directly, but she's already met with her legal team, and we just got word from her office that our corporate contract is under review." Nathan leaned back in his chair. His eyes drifted toward the framed map of Aerovia's global routes hanging behind his desk. "If we lose her," he said, "we don't just lose Alturas. We lose every company that watches how we handle this." There was silence on the line. "I want a direct call scheduled," Nathan said. "I'll speak to her personally, but not until I have something meaningful to offer. I'm not calling her with damage control. I'm calling her with change." "Understood." The call ended. Nathan stood and walked to the window. The Atlanta skyline was just beginning to blush with sunrise. He had always believed Aerovia was better than this. Their training, their culture, their values. But it was clear now that values printed on a poster in a break room meant nothing if they weren't practiced at 36,000 feet. A soft knock on the office door pulled him from his thoughts. His chief of staff entered, carrying a red folder. "This just came from Dr. Monroe's office," she said. Nathan opened the folder. Inside was a printed document, 6 demands, typed, bold, unmistakably structured: public acknowledgement, staff termination, third-party anti-bias training, diversity hiring metrics, civil rights donations, a personal meeting. He read each line carefully. There was no anger in the language, only precision. No corporate speak, no negotiation, just expectations. He had to admit, it was brilliant. This wasn't about retribution. It was about accountability. And as he read, something inside him shifted. He thought about his own daughters, both in college. One of them wanted to be a pilot. She had faced her own share of whispers, doubters, silent exclusions. He had coached her through them, told her to keep going. But he hadn't asked how many of those barriers were built by his own company's culture. Nathan returned to his desk and opened a blank email to legal, PR, HR, flight ops. Subject: immediate response plan, Flight 227 incident. We are not issuing a blanket apology. We are initiating reform, effective immediately. I want 1. All staff involved in this incident placed on administrative leave. 2. All passenger complaints involving racial profiling in the past 36 months pulled and reviewed. 3. Third-party civil rights consultants contacted for long-term training programs. 4. A statement drafted that clearly acknowledges our failure. No vagueness, no excuses. 5. A direct outreach to Dr. Monroe's office requesting a personal meeting within 48 hours. This company does not move forward until we own what we allowed to happen. Nathan hit send. Then he sat back and stared out at the lights spreading across the sky. Sometimes, a company faces a storm of its own making. And sometimes, The storm walks calmly down the jet bridge in a Navy suit and changes everything. At 7:42 a.m. Central Time, a teenage girl named Avery Campton sat at her kitchen table in Minneapolis, scrolling through her For You page on her cracked iPhone. She had skipped breakfast, and her school Chromebook sat unopened beside her cereal bowl. Like most mornings, she was looking for something that made her feel connected to a world bigger than algebra tests and cafeteria rumors. That's when she saw it. A woman, calm, seated in first class, was being questioned by a white flight attendant. Then a security officer entered the frame. The woman didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply asked questions, held her ground, and eventually stood up, walking off the plane with a kind of grace that clashed violently with the absurdity of the situation. The caption read, "She had the ticket, the status, the ID." But none of that was enough. Avery didn't know who the woman was, but her eyes burned as she watched the clip. She hit share. By mid-morning, the video had traveled far beyond the reach of aviation blogs and travel complaints. It was on major news sites, overlaid with commentary and reaction clips from influencers, professors, civil rights lawyers. Hashtags surged across platforms. Talk shows picked it up. Network anchors teased it before the commercial break. And everywhere, one question was asked in slightly different forms. If this can happen to her, who is safe from it? By 10 The name was trending. Dr. Alina Monroe. People began searching her credentials. Interviews surfaced. Photos from conferences. She had keynoted the Global Supply Summit in Geneva. She had met with world leaders. She had started a scholarship fund for underrepresented women in engineering. And still, someone had looked at her and decided she didn't belong. At the Alturas Global Office in Chicago, Jordan Ellis sat at his desk watching the company's social inbox explode. "Ma'am," he called out across the office, where Alina was reading through the draft response from Aerovia's legal department. The video hit 3 million views. Alina looked up, eyes unreadable. In how long? 10 hours. News outlets are calling. CNN, Vox, Bloomberg, even NPR wants a long-form interview. She didn't answer right away. Then she closed the legal memo and walked to the window. From 10 floors up, the city looked clean and cold and humming with motion. "What does the statement say?" she asked. Jordan read aloud from the screen. Aerovia International acknowledges that an unfortunate misunderstanding occurred aboard Flight 227. While the situation is under review, we reaffirm our commitment to all passengers and diversity values. Alina snorted softly. "Misunderstanding?" Jordan looked over. "Do we respond?" "Not yet. They're stalling. I want a real answer, not a smokescreen." Her phone buzzed in her hand, a number she didn't recognize. She answered, her voice calm as always. "This is Dr. Monroe," a voice replied. Formal, composed. "Dr. Monroe. This is Nathan Cross. I'm the CEO of Aerovia. Thank you for taking my call." She didn't speak for a second. She let him sit in the silence. "I imagine you're quite busy this morning," she finally said. "Yes, and I imagine you are as well," he replied. There was a brief pause. Then Nathan continued, "I watched the footage, and I read the demands your team sent over. I'd like to meet, in person, privately, as soon as possible." Alina turned to Jordan and mouthed, "He's calling now." Jordan gave her a thumbs up. She walked back to her desk and sat. "Tell me," she said. "Why now? Because the cameras are rolling? Or because you realized your culture failed?" Nathan didn't flinch. "Because both are true. And because I believe This isn't a moment for PR. It's a moment for correction. If you'll let me show you that. She looked out the window again. There were a dozen responses she could give, but only one mattered now. Fly to Chicago, she said. Today. Bring no one, and prepare to listen. I will. They ended the call. Jordan's eyes widened. He's coming. Alina gave a single nod. Good, she said. Let's see who he really is. 4 hours later. Nathan Cross stepped into the polished lobby of Alturas Global. He wore a charcoal suit and carried no briefcase, no assistant, no PR advisor. The receptionist led him to the glass-walled executive suite where Alina waited at a long conference table. She didn't stand to greet him, but she gestured to the seat across from her. He sat. For a moment, they simply looked at one another, two powerful people, seated across a table, no longer hidden behind titles or distance. You've reviewed the footage, he asked. Yes. You've spoken to your team, I have. They failed. I failed. She raised an eyebrow. That's the first honest thing I've heard from your side. He took a breath. I came here today not to make excuses, but to offer something real. We'll meet every demand, not because of your status, but because we were wrong. Alina leaned back. I've been watching your company for years. Mr. Cross, your brand is modern, polished, but your culture, that's built in silence, in assumptions, in the idea that people like me must constantly prove they deserve to be where they already are. Nathan swallowed hard. I agree. I don't want a press conference, she continued. I want transformation. I want the next black woman who walks onto your plane to be treated like she belongs before she even shows her ticket. He nodded slowly. You'll get that. Starting now. Alina paused, then reached into her leather folder and slid a paper across the table. A new contract. One with an addendum clause. It outlined a review board made up of external civil rights experts. It listed new passenger equity protocols, and at the bottom, in bold ink, it read, Failure to uphold these terms will result in immediate and permanent termination of corporate partnership. Nathan took the pen she offered and signed. After he left, Jordan returned to the room. Alina was still seated, quiet. He asked, That's it. She shook her head. No, that's just the beginning. She opened her laptop, typed a new headline. Statement from Dr. Alina Monroe on Aerovia reform. She would speak now, but not just for herself. For every girl watching that video. For every professional made to feel like an intruder in a space she earned. For every quiet voice waiting for someone to say enough. The Alturas Global press release went live at 6:02 p.m. Central Time. It wasn't flashy. There were no headlines in all caps, no dramatic image or highlighted pull quotes, just plain text, white background, black font, but the words were anything but quiet. I did not raise my voice because I shouldn't have to. I did not resist because my existence was already seen as resistance. I did not cry because I've cried in silence before. But I will speak, not for a headline, for a future. Dr. Alina Monroe. Beneath the quote, the release continued with a direct, unflinching retelling of the incident aboard Flight 227. It named the airline. It named the behavior. It made no demands and issued no threats. It simply told the truth. And then, in the final paragraph, it explained the signed agreement. Aerovia International, after review and acknowledgement of its failure to uphold equitable treatment aboard Flight 227, has entered into binding reform measures, effective immediately. These include public transparency audits, independent accountability boards, and active partnership with civil rights organizations. This is not a conclusion. This is a beginning. By 8 more p.m., the statement had been reshared more than 4 million times across platforms. Influencers read it aloud over soft piano music. Teachers printed it and posted it on classroom doors. A well-known actor tweeted. Her calm dismantled what decades of noise could not. I stand with Dr. Monroe. But something more unexpected happened. People began sharing their own stories. A man in Dallas recalled being questioned for using his own first-class ticket. A black woman in Miami posted about being told twice to return to coach despite her boarding pass. A mother in Boston wrote, "My daughter was 7. She asked me why the flight attendant skipped her when passing out snacks in business class. I didn't know how to answer her." The stories flooded in, and with them, a collective ache began to surface. Not rage, but weariness, the kind that came from carrying quiet indignities for years and pretending they were small enough to ignore. Helena watched the movement unfold from her home office. She sat with her laptop open and her phone face down beside her. Her inbox had become a torrent of media requests, public praise, and even a few thinly veiled threats from people who preferred the old order. Jordan sat across from her, pale with exhaustion, but wide-eyed with awe. "You just moved the ceiling," he said softly. Helena didn't answer right away. She stared at the screen, scrolling through names she didn't know, but who were now tied to her in ways that felt unbreakable. "It was never about a seat," she murmured. Jordan nodded. "I know." She closed the laptop and looked at him. "Do you think they really understand Arovia? I mean, or are they just afraid of losing contracts and headlines?" Jordan hesitated, then spoke honestly. "They're afraid, but maybe now they'll also begin to listen." She folded her hands in her lap. "You know what bothered me the most?" she asked. He looked up. "It wasn't the removal," she said. "It was how normal it felt, how practiced everyone was, like they had done this before, like my presence was the disruption, not their behavior." Jordan's jaw tightened. Helena leaned forward, voice low. "We're going to build something more than a policy change." He raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, a platform, a project, something that lives beyond this week's news cycle?" "You want to start a foundation." "No," she said. "I want to start a movement that doesn't need my name to survive. One that teaches airlines, schools, corporations, hospitals how to see people fully, not selectively." Jordan's eyes lit up. "You want to create a dignity protocol?" Helena smiled. "That's exactly what I want." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside the window, the Chicago skyline glittered with early evening light. Somewhere overhead, dozens of planes cut through the darkening sky, each filled with passengers who just wanted to be treated with decency. Inside a quiet office, a new blueprint for that dignity was being born. Across the country, the impact deepened. In Washington, a senator tweeted her support for Monroe's reforms, tagging Arovia directly and calling for a congressional hearing on discrimination in travel services. In Los Angeles, an airline pilot quietly reached out to Alturas Global and shared his resignation letter, citing a toxic crew culture he had ignored for too long. In Atlanta, an elderly woman named Lillian drafted a handwritten note. She didn't have a Twitter or a Facebook page, but she asked her granddaughter to mail the letter to Dr. Helena Monroe's company. The letter said, "Dear Dr. Monroe, when I was younger, I was told to take the bus, not the train, to stand, not sit, to wait, not ask. I never got on a plane until I was 52. When I did, I held my coat in my lap so I wouldn't take up space. Watching you sit still while they tried to move you reminded me who I was before the world made me smaller. Thank you for not shrinking. With grace. Lillian W., back at Alturas. Jordan printed the letter and slipped it onto Alina's desk the next morning. She read it slowly, folded it carefully, and placed it in the center drawer of her desk, next to her father's old pocket notebook and a photograph of her mother. This wasn't just about change. It was about memory, about honoring every silent voice that came before, about making sure they were never erased again. Alina turned back to her screen and opened a new document, Project Stanton, the Passenger Dignity Initiative. It would be the next step. And it would start not with policy, but with people. People like the woman who had carried her coat. People like the girl who had watched the viral clip over cereal. People who needed the reminder that they didn't need to prove their right to exist with every boarding pass. Her voice would start it, but theirs would carry it. Melissa Crane opened her front door to find a courier standing on her porch with a plain white envelope in his gloved hand. The man didn't smile. He asked her to sign, handed over the package, and left without a word. Inside, the heater hummed softly as Melissa peeled the envelope open. The letter inside was short, 6 sentences, formal, cold, effective immediately. You are placed on unpaid administrative leave, pending the outcome of an internal investigation regarding the incident on Flight 227. She read it twice. Her hand trembled slightly as she folded the paper back into the envelope. She had worked for Arovia International for 9 years, senior flight attendant, 4 times awarded for excellence in customer care. She had trained dozens of new recruits. She had never received a formal complaint, and yet here she was, alone in a quiet apartment, under investigation, with her name suddenly a curse on the internet. Her phone buzzed again. 20 unread messages, some supportive, most not. She clicked on one of the articles. Her name was in the 3rd paragraph. Melissa Crane, the flight attendant who removed Dr. Monroe, has not issued a public statement. Of course not. She had been told not to speak. Legal had instructed all crew involved to remain silent until the internal review was complete. But it didn't matter. The silence was already screaming. Melissa sat on the edge of her couch, staring at her hands. They didn't feel like the hands of a villain. And yet, the more she thought about it, the harder it became to explain her actions on that flight. She had followed her gut. That's what she told herself. Something felt off. The woman didn't immediately engage when she was greeted. She wasn't overly warm. She hadn't smiled. But now, in the stillness of her apartment, Melissa asked herself something she hadn't asked before. Why had she interpreted silence as defiance? Why had she looked at a composed, self-assured black woman and assumed the worst? She didn't have a good answer, and she wasn't sure there was one. Elsewhere, in a small beige conference room inside Arovia headquarters, Diane Brewster sat with HR and legal counsel across from her. She hadn't spoken since the meeting began. A woman from the compliance team read off a timeline of gate communications. When she reached the part where Diane had authorized security intervention, the room went even quieter. You do understand that no policy was broken by the passenger, correct? The HR lead asked. Diane nodded stiffly. So what triggered your call to remove her? Diane looked down at her hands. There was tension. The flight attendant had radioed in that the woman was being non-cooperative. And did you confirm that before calling in security, No. I relied on Melissa's judgment. She's senior crew. I trusted her read of the situation. The lawyer spoke next. Ms. Brewster, are you aware that the passenger you removed was not only compliant, but also fully documented, credentialed, and seated with a valid boarding pass? Yes. Are you aware of the reputational and legal risk your decision has brought this airline? She didn't answer right away. Then finally, she said, I was wrong. The lawyer raised his eyebrows. Could you repeat that I said I was wrong? I didn't investigate. I reacted, and I'm sorry. The lawyer glanced at the HR lead. It was too late for apologies. The internal memo had already circulated a list of immediate suspensions, mandatory training, and reassignments. But more than that, there was something deeper happening within the ranks of Aerovia staff, a reckoning. In a private flight attendants group chat, messages had poured in for days. Some were defensive. She should have just said something. Why make a scene? Others were more reflective. If she looked like me, would this have even happened? Still others were furious. We're trained for bias. This makes us all look guilty. But a new message appeared that evening from a junior flight attendant who had once trained under Melissa. She wrote, I remember when I boarded a flight with my hair in braids, and a gate agent asked if I was part of a youth group. I was 27. I had a badge. I had a uniform. And still, he assumed I didn't belong. That day, Melissa told me to laugh it off. Now I wonder if I ever should have. The chat went quiet after that. Meanwhile, Officer Liam Grant sat in a dim room in the airport security office, staring at the footage again. Over and over, the moment played out where he approached Dr. Monroe and asked her to step off the aircraft. He hadn't drawn his weapon. He hadn't raised his voice. But he had not asked a question either. He had assumed she was the problem. And now, a formal disciplinary review was underway. His union representative had told him to prepare for suspension, possibly termination. His supervisor had not offered comfort, only facts. You made a call, a bad one, and the world watched. Liam rubbed his temples. He had a wife, 2 kids, a mortgage. He wasn't a racist, he told himself. He didn't hate anyone. But the facts didn't care about how he felt. The facts were that a black woman was mistreated because no one bothered to see her fully. Not even him. And that was enough to cost him everything. Back at Alturas Global, Jordan Ellis reviewed the list of formal disciplinary actions that Aerovia had just released. Melissa Crane, suspended pending further action. Diane Brewster reassigned, salary frozen. Officer Liam Grant, placed on temporary leave. New bias training mandatory for all flight and ground staff by next quarter. Jordan exhaled and looked across the table at Alina. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply nodded once. They are beginning to understand, she said. Jordan hesitated before speaking. You don't seem satisfied. I'm not here for satisfaction, she replied. I'm here for change, real change. And if they don't follow through... She looked up, her eyes steady. Then they'll lose more than contracts. They'll lose their soul. That night, Alina sat alone in her apartment, rereading an email from a stranger. It was from a former Aerovia employee who had resigned a year ago after experiencing repeated microaggressions in her training cohort. She wrote, I thought no one would believe me, that I was imagining it. But when I saw what they did to you, I knew I had been right to leave. Thank you for making the invisible visible. Alina closed her laptop. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired, changed, but resolute. Because this wasn't about a single flight. It was about every invisible battle before it. And now, the whole world was watching what would happen next. The girl in 3C had been watching the whole time. She was quiet, her hands folded in her lap like her mother had taught her. Her name was Riley James. She was 8 years old and traveling alone for the first time, headed to spend spring break with her grandparents in Baltimore. It had been her mother's idea, a chance for Riley to see the East Coast, to hear the stories her grandfather told about being a Pullman porter. He used to say, "Baby girl, back in my day, we weren't allowed to ride up front, much less work up there." So Riley was excited when her mom had surprised her with a first-class seat. "Just once," her mother said. "I want you to know how it feels to be treated like you matter." Riley was nervous at first. The plush seats, the polished trays, the smell of coffee that didn't come from a drive-thru. But then she had seen the woman in the navy blue suit enter the cabin. She looked like someone important, like a teacher or a principal, maybe even a senator. Riley had watched her sit down, straighten her skirt, pull out a book. The woman didn't look around like she was trying to impress anyone. She didn't even flinch when the flight attendant started questioning her. That was the part Riley didn't understand. The lady hadn't done anything wrong. She was just sitting there, like everyone else. But the flight attendant kept coming back, her voice sharp, her tone like how Riley's vice principal sounded when he thought someone was lying. And when the security man came, Riley had held her breath, but the woman never yelled. She just looked him in the eye and asked questions. And then she walked out with her head high. Riley had never seen anything like it. Now, weeks later, Riley sat on her grandmother's porch with a glass of lemonade in one hand and a crumpled article in the other. It was a printout from the local library. Her grandfather had found it and highlighted the name. "Dr. Alina Monroe. Is that the lady from the plane?" her grandfather asked. Riley nodded slowly. "She didn't cry," Riley whispered. Her grandfather looked at her and smiled. "That's called dignity, baby. That's when you carry your pride so quiet. It makes the whole room louder." Riley thought about that for a long time. Back in Chicago, Alina sat at her desk reading letters from schools, advocacy groups, and young professionals who had seen the video or read her statement. But one envelope stood out. It was pink, with glittery ink and slightly bent corners. She opened it carefully. Inside was a card with drawings of clouds and airplanes. A child's handwriting filled the page. "Dear Dr. Monroe, I saw you on the plane. I was in 3C. You were really brave. I wanted to say something, but I got scared. My mom says we need to speak up when we see wrong things. I didn't that day, but I will next time. Love, Riley James." Alina closed her eyes. The tears came quietly, not from pain, but from something deeper. Hope. She picked up a pen and began writing back. "Dear Riley, you saw what many adults pretend not to. You watched. You understood. That is already speaking up. Next time, you will be ready, and I will be cheering you on. With love, Dr. Alina Monroe." Jordan entered the room as she sealed the envelope. "What's that a reminder?" she said. "Of what that every story is being watched, especially by the ones we don't see." She handed him the envelope. "Make sure this reaches her." Later that night, Jordan sat in his own apartment, still thinking about Riley. He imagined her small face, the big seat, the confusion in her eyes as she watched the woman next to her get removed for reasons no child should have to explain. And he realized something. The movement wasn't just for people like Alina, or people like him. It was for the ones who hadn't yet learned to shrink, the ones who still believed the world could be fair. If only someone showed them how. At Aerovia headquarters, Nathan Cross stood in the hallway outside the training center. Inside, 20 new hires sat in their first week of onboarding. Behind them, a large screen displayed a slideshow titled Passenger Equity and Dignity in Service. The first slide showed a quote, "Every passenger brings a story. Your job is not to judge it. Your job is to make sure their journey is respected." Aerovia Dignity Protocol. 2025. Nathan watched quietly as the lead instructor introduced a case study. Flight 227. The incident had become part of the curriculum. It wasn't a cover-up. It was a case study in what not to do, and what must change. Nathan knew some people resented it. He had heard the whispers, that this was overcorrecting, that it was political, that they were being forced to walk on eggshells. But he also saw something else. He saw the younger recruits leaning forward. He saw questions being asked, not avoided. He saw eyes that wanted to understand. And that gave him something he hadn't expected to feel. Pride, not in the mistake, but in the willingness to face it. He left the hallway without saying anything. He didn't need credit. This was Alina's legacy now. In a school on the south side of Chicago, a fifth-grade teacher taped a printout of Alina's statement on the wall. Next to it, she wrote in marker, "Dignity is louder than shouting. It is presence. It is power. It is proof." And in a small bedroom filled with stuffed animals and paperback books, Riley James read her reply letter for the 5th time. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the feeling. The next time she sat on a plane, she would sit a little taller, not because the seat was bigger, but because someone had shown her what it meant to belong there. Fully. The flight to Tokyo was quiet, but charged with a new kind of energy. Dr. Alina Monroe settled into her seat aboard the private Aerovia charter. It was a different plane from Flight 227. Sleek, polished, staffed by a crew briefed on every detail of the incident that had sparked an industry-wide reckoning. Captain Maria Rodriguez greeted Alina warmly at the door. Her voice was steady and sincere. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Monroe. I want to personally apologize for what you experienced. That behavior does not reflect our values." Alina nodded, sensing the weight of those words. The flight attendants were professional without being overbearing. They treated her with a respect she had every right to expect, but that had once been denied. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Alina gazed out the window. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, not just the miles in the air, but the miles walked through silence, doubt, and prejudice. Her phone buzzed quietly in her purse. A message from Jordan. "The media is covering the new flight. Public response is overwhelmingly positive." She smiled softly. This wasn't just about her. It was about every passenger who had ever felt unseen. During the flight, Captain Rodriguez made a brief announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have Dr. Alina Monroe aboard. This flight represents a commitment to change and respect for all travelers, regardless of race, gender, or background." The cabin was small, the passengers few, but the significance of those words was immense. Alina closed her eyes briefly and let the moment wash over her. She remembered the first-class cabin on Flight 227, the tension, the silence, the judgment, and she thought about Riley James, the little girl in Seat 3C, who had watched everything quietly but never forgot. This flight was more than a correction. It was a promise. Back in Chicago, the Project Stanton team gathered for their first official meeting. The initiative was named for the street where Alina's childhood home had once stood, a quiet neighborhood that had shaped her values and her determination. Jordan opened the meeting. We have a unique opportunity to change not just Arovia, but the industry. Alina stood, her voice calm but unwavering. Dignity isn't a program or a policy. It's a culture, a commitment to seeing people fully. She laid out the blueprint for the Passenger Dignity Initiative. It included mandatory bias training designed and delivered by external experts, quarterly diversity audits with public transparency, a civil rights ombudsman reporting directly to the board, community partnerships to support underrepresented travelers, and a scholarship fund for young women pursuing careers in aviation and logistics. The room was silent as they absorbed the scope. Then, Jordan smiled. This is how change happens, not with anger or blame, but with accountability and action. Over the following months, the ripple effect grew. Arovia's changes set a new industry standard. Other airlines adopted similar programs. Congressional hearings led to new regulations protecting passengers against discrimination. At conferences and in boardrooms, Alina spoke not only of logistics and business, but of justice and dignity. Her message was clear: success means little if it comes at the cost of erasing others. Months later, Alina received a call from Riley James's mother. "She wants to thank you again," she said. "Riley says you changed how she sees the world." Alina's eyes filled with tears. "I'm the one who's grateful," she replied, "because the fight wasn't over. It never would be." But for the first time, she believed the path forward was brighter. As the charter landed in Tokyo, Alina prepared for the meeting that would secure the future of Alturas Global Logistics. But more importantly, she knew she was carrying the hopes of many not just for business, but for belonging. The cabin lights dimmed, and the plane touched down smoothly. She smiled, ready for what came next. Because belonging was not just a seat on a plane. It was the right to be seen, to be heard, to be respected. And that was a flight worth taking. What we witness today is more than just an incident on a plane. It is a reflection of a systemic problem that affects millions. Dr. Alina Monroe's story is a testament to strength, grace, and the relentless fight against discrimination. It reminds us that dignity should never be conditional on appearance or assumptions. While justice was served and change began to take root, the deeper message is clear: no one should ever feel like they don't belong. We owe it to ourselves and to future generations to stand against bias and build a world where respect is given freely, not earned through struggle. Thank you for listening with an open heart. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to support more powerful stories like this. Together, we can inspire change and keep the conversation alive. Stay tuned for more stories that challenge injustice and celebrate the courage of those who dare to stand up for what is right. See you in the next video.